So welcome everybody. Welcome to our second in this series of webinars. Jack might fall over if I say series. I don't know. We haven't got another one planned. Don't worry. This is the second webinar. Sorry, Jack, just teasing. How to bring the inside out understanding into community. And we ran the first webinar last week and we had a few questions come in, and so suggested that we run a follow-up, and I'm really pleased to say that Jack, Diane and Janet could make it. Unfortunately, or fortunately for Lily, she's on the Camino de Santiago, so she couldn't make it. She's doing her thing in Spain somewhere, or maybe France. But I'm really pleased to have Jack Pransky, Diane McMillen and Janet Rhynie here. So I'm just going to give them a very brief introduction and then we're going to kick off. So Jack Pransky, just asked him, how many books have you authored? 10. 10 books. 9 on the principles and 1 pre-principles. So he's an author of 10 books. He's an internationally recognized 3 principles trainer, coach, mentor, and consultant. And he learned directly from Sydney Banks. And he has worked in the field of prevention, I know I'm just little, since 1968. 1968, a long, long time. So he's been around the block a few times. Then Diane McMillen is a retired professor. Yeah, retired professor since 2017. She was introduced over 30 years ago to inside out prevention. I think that was via Jack, I believe so. Her teachings and trainings and intervention strategies reflected the understanding of the 3 principles, and she's used it in all of her work. And then we move to the lovely Ms. Janet Rhynie. So Janet has we've got decades and decades and decades of experience here. Janet on her own has 27 years of experience working in the behavioural change sector. Since 2009, she's been introducing the 3 principles to communities and creating communities for people to access the principles and have their voices heard. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Jack. I will be asking you some questions, and if anybody has any questions, we'll have some time for that too. So we'll have a bit of interaction. Jack, do you want me to ask you a question initially, or do you just want to go straight into talking about Modello? Or?
Oh, I want you to ask me questions, but first I want to say how nice it is to see everybody. It's just wonderful, as always, to see everybody.
Yeah. Well, on the last webinar, the word Modello was thrown around quite a lot, and I think there was an assumption on the team that people would know what that meant. And I had some feedback and some questions like, yeah, what's Modello? What's all that about? So I'd love it if you could speak, Jack. Jack wrote the book Modello based on the impact of Roger Mills going into a low-income housing project in America. I can't remember what year it was. There you go. There's the book, Modello. So Jack, would you like to talk to that somewhat and let people know what Modello was all about?
I made the stupid assumption last time, the very stupid assumption that people who were on the call knew what it was. So I just started from that point. Modello is the name of a housing project that was in Dade County, Florida, which is right in the same county that Miami is in. And it was the worst possible place imaginable in terms of violence, both domestic and gang violence. There were shootings every night, drug dealers in every corner. It was not a wonderful place to live and grow up in. And so Roger Mills went in there thinking, this is the place for me. And he kind of glommed onto a project that was already started by State Attorney Janet Rhynie at the time. And what happened was that he went in there. Everybody thought that he was crazy. He was taking this inside out approach into this community. People didn't want him there. They tried to get him out of there. He would not leave because he knew deep in his heart that what he understood could have an incredible impact on people's lives and the whole community. But I was just thinking, I was just reflecting today when I was walking on the beach, and he his strategy at the time was fly by the seat of my pants. He did not know what he was going to do. He just was armed with this beautiful understanding of the three principles. And he knew that somehow he was going to convey that to people in whatever way they were open to hearing about it. And he was expecting that their lives would end up changing for the better, which they did. And then there was a critical mass of people who, once they started like catching on to this, they all started wanting to create the physical changes in their community that they needed to make. But that was all from the inside out. It started from their own, he was pointing them to their own health and well-being, to their spiritual essence, so to speak, even though he never used those words, and pointing them to how thought was the only thing, their creative power of thought was the only thing that could take them away from what everybody had inside ourselves naturally. This peace, love, and wisdom that we all have in our spiritual essence. And so, even though people didn't know what he was talking about, even though they really went out of their way to get him to make it uncomfortable enough for him so that he would leave, he stuck around. He brought in a couple of staff people to work with him who had the feeling, and the rest is history. It just 2.5 years later, the entire housing project was turned around. And it wasn't like everybody in the housing project caught on, but there was enough people who caught on, who started to work together to make those changes. And that's how it happened. Diane, you have anything to add?
I imagine that. I'm going to back it up just a little bit more. And I think the reason I want to add this is that I feel what all of us feel about, once you really kind of see what Sid Banks was pointing us toward, like once you kind of know it, it's hard to not just want to share it, like to make the world a better place. And the thing about Roger that I had the good fortune of meeting him and spending time with him, but he's just a regular guy like the rest of us. And before he was one of the original people in the 60s in the United States. They started a thing called deinstitutionalization, and maybe it went worldwide, but we really institutionalized people, especially folks that struggle with mental health needs and issues like that. And we got them out of state institutions, and because they didn't really need to be in lockup, they just needed to have a community base where mental health, as opposed to a focus on mental illness, was the goal. And so he got one of the very first federal grants and was in Oregon at the time. So he was working in community mental health, and he was seeing the revolving door of people, getting their act together, being released, and then falling apart again because, they thought they were better because the outside world had given them things they needed to be able to live in the world, because that was the mental health. Well, back then was just really a focus. We didn't even use the word mental health. They were just focusing on fixing people who were broken because of their struggles with mental health. So Roger was seeing firsthand this great idea of getting people that have special needs, that have troubles, that have difficulties, that have challenges, to be able to live a regular life. And so he was just accidentally and serendipitously introduced to Sid Banks. And he also was living a life in academia that wasn't that fulfilling. I mean, he was working hard and, you know, being one of those college professor types that could be blustery and wanted his way, and, you know, all of these ways of being in the world. And then he started to change. He started to change with his colleagues. He started to change with his daughter. He just started to see the world differently and be differently. And then, and so just like any one of us, you know, he had an insight deep enough that it changed his life. And then he would like to see that. And really the living conditions in Modello and the lifestyle of the people. And they, I mean, they really did try to run him out at first because, you know, I mean, their roofs are falling in, they're being shot at, their children are being raped, you know, right in front of the house in the playground. Like there's just horrible things going on. And he's telling them that they all have wisdom and they all have brilliance inside them and they all have the capacity to live the life that they want to. And it was just, you know, it seemed impossible. It seemed like he really was out of his mind. And he did hire people, and not mental health, not trained. I mean, both Pam and they were just folks that had a feeling, just like Jack was saying. And then they caught on to helping, pointing people in the direction of the insight. And really, I mean, we're talking about statistics that for a social worker, I was protective service. I did investigation of child abuse and child neglect. So the idea that you could have a school that had a 60% teen pregnancy rate drop to 10%, or a high school dropout rate of 60% of kids drop out before graduation and it goes to 10%. I mean, when you see like mind-boggling statistical changes in a community, and then they replicated the approach to Modello in Coliseum Gardens in California. And Coliseum Gardens had been labeled the murder capital of the United States for years running. And after a year, their murder rate went to 0. And for the next 7 years after, like, so for somebody like me who was a college professor and trying to really figure out like what really will make a difference in people's lives, what really does change, that folks can have, you know, happier family life, more satisfying relationships with their children, a work life that brings them, and like these regular, what we all dream about, you know, grandma has a place to live where they take good care of her. I mean, like all these things they were being able to accomplish from the inside out. And that, like, that just gets your attention in terms of what we can really do that makes a difference.
My attention.
Yeah, got my attention too. Yeah, I threw everything I knew out the window and went another direction. So for 20 years, yeah. So
Yeah,
Do you have anything to add?
sorry, go ahead.
what do you, I mean, I will hold up the props because can you see that book named Modello? This is, you see how like all the pages are falling out? It's all dog-eared and marked because I taught out of this book for so many years. And I mean, it's a story, like I think I said this last time, but like I'd been a college professor for a number of years by the time I started doing this. I started in 80. And so I started teaching out of Modello in 2005. And the students' reaction to reading the book, like I was a few minutes late to class one day because I got stopped by a student. And when I walked in, I mean, usually there's a lot of chatter in my class. We sit in a circle. We don't line up. I'm not at the front of the room. I move around or I sit with them in the circle. So there's always a lot of chatter. And so when I first walked in, there was a whole lot of chatter. And I expected it to be about, the TV show that was on the night before, the series that they were watching or whatever was going on. But as I'm listening, I'm hearing them saying, well, Lloyd, and if Pamela, and I realized that they've started class without me. They're having a conversation about the Modello book before I ever even arrived in the classroom. They didn't wait for me to get there to start class. They were so enthusiastic about what they were reading and what they were learning about what was happening in this housing complex. And that was when I stood in the doorway and thought, well, something is really happening here, because these kids were just gravitating toward what they were reading, and they're all planning to go out and, you know, work in with violence or in drug addiction or in child welfare, whatever their future paths were going to be. And they were learning something that they truly believed was going to make a giant difference in the work they did. That was extraordinary.
Yeah, that's the thing. The entire world of prevention was functioning from the outside in. The entire world of social work was functioning from the outside in. So somebody like Roger Mills comes along and says, that's actually backwards. It really works from the inside out. I mean, no wonder people thought that he was crazy and they wanted him out of there. Go ahead, Janet.
Right. Yeah, for anybody who wasn't here last week, just to add that it was seeing a video about the work that Roger had done in Modello, which inspired the insight for me to think this will change the world. And as I read the book and found out more, when Roger Mills first went into Modello, and as we were saying, that the situation was dire. There was murder. The police were frightened to go in there. It was just one of the worst situations. And Roger realized, even then, as Diane said, he didn't really know what he was doing. And so going in and talking about well-being with parents initially, they're just like, this makes no sense. Our children can't eat. They haven't got whatever, they haven't got the basics. And so Roger then also looked at, okay, then, in order for you to listen and hear, let's help you with the basics. So it wasn't just, okay, here are the principles, here's understanding. It's like, let me meet you where you're at. And that's what I love about our innate wisdom. We know where we want to point people towards and where Sid was pointing people towards, but it's also about the human. How can we meet the basic human needs that will allow you to hear what we've got to say? And I suppose that's the same as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you can meet the basic fundamental needs, then you can go up and start listening and understanding about your wisdom, about your thought life. And so there's so many different layers within that book. Even speaking to Jack about the book, Jack actually spoke to the people who lived in Modello to tell their story, not to be told from a professional's perspective, but to have the perspective of the people who actually lived there. So in seeing the video, that's what inspired me. But in reading the book, you then have a deeper understanding of where your wisdom can take you when you want to start sharing this understanding within communities.
Great. And the reason for doing the inside out community change retreat in Spain is because it's not that these things have stopped. There are a number of people doing great work with inside out community change around the world, but the percentage is very, very, very small. And in the beginning, it was actually about 50% of what was going on in the three principles. All this community-based stuff, it was about 50% when I first got into it. And so it kind of hurts my soul to have seen it dwindle so much. So what we're hoping to do with this retreat is to help rekindle the spark, get more people interested in going in this direction, and help it spread further than it has been recently.
Piggybacking off what Jack's saying, like one of the things that came up in the last webinar was a person inquiring about like sustained support for like a wing of 3PC, the three principles that really does support community. And I would be so supportive of something like that personally, because I mean, I know for years I went to all the conferences, and whenever Sid was speaking or Roger was speaking or George Pransky, whoever the leaders of that community 20 years ago were when I first started. I mean, I went to everything. I flew anywhere there was somebody who was talking and bringing people together, because a lot of it was my area, the area of community. And, whether it was a community of juvenile delinquents living in a center, or whether it was, people who were trying to live without alcohol. I mean, whatever the communities were, that was what my interest was, not the coaching stuff. And so I've sort of faded out of the whole group of 3Ps, because I felt like that's not exactly what I want. And and I can't be the only one that feels that way, you know. And so we talked about maybe out of those workshop, there's a potential that there will grow a community of, you know, and have some little leaders and have ongoing webinars or support or opportunities for people to, you know, continue to support and, you know, idea share and solution build and all the things that when you feel lonely out in your community, that you're not alone. Like there really is this whole wing of the 3 principles that's very much involved in supporting this kind of change at every level that it is available.
I was going to follow on from what Diane was saying there about the community work, because I know when when I first heard about the principles, I was going to start doing some work within criminal justice and working with female offenders. And as I think Jack said, it was like 50-50. So there's groups of us who worked with Aaron Turner and Mara Gleason, but there are people who also worked with Elsie and Chip. And so, and I don't know, like Steve Adair and Tony Fiedler, they worked with homelessness. And so even within the UK, when we started sharing it within the UK, it wasn't necessarily an either or, it was an and. We had professional clients or coaching clients, but we also had community work or even started sharing it in our local communities as well. So it doesn't have to be an either or. I think what we hear a lot of is about the coaching, the business, those kind of ways. But there is a lot of community work that is ongoing. It's just that it's not highlighted and spotlighted as much.
Did you have other questions?
Great point. Thank you. Yes, I do. And I think this is one of the, well, we've just covered what I would say was the biggest one. The second biggest one was, so you mentioned earlier on that Roger flew by the seat of his pants in terms of going into Modello and sharing the 3 principles. And in the last webinar, you mentioned that you had, I can't remember the word you used exactly, but you'd noticed a system and you'd uncovered a system. And it's funny because you said, oh, it's in the back of my book, Hope for All. And I know somebody who's on this webinar that ran out and bought that book. And I have it sitting here. What I'd love for you to do, Jack, is to share, because that's the system. It's unusual when the 3 principles conversation to have a model, a system, a how-to. But I know that on the retreat here in October, that's exactly what you'll be up to. You'll be teaching a system. You'll be teaching the system that you uncovered. So would you let us know what that is going to look like, please?
Yes, with the caveat that it'll just be words unless people have the experience. And the whole purpose of the retreat is for people to have the experience. So, yeah, I mean, it's a formless system, which is kind of a contradiction in terms. So what happened was there was this guy named Bill Lofquist who had written a book, Discovering the Meaning of Prevention. And that was the book that people most looked to in the prevention field to know what they were doing in prevention. And so I got to be a little friendly with him, and he was then writing a book on prevention systems. And he asked me if I would write a chapter on the health realization system, as we called it then. And so I thought, well, what is the health realization system? There must be a system, but I didn't know what it was. And so I went back through Modello with a fine-tooth comb, and I realized what the system was. And it's the same exact system that we use in coaching. It's the same exact system that we use in working with businesses. It's the same thing with teaching the principles. It's over and over and over again, the same exact thing. So it's not a mystery at all. The first thing is that we ourselves need to be solidly grounded in what we're talking about. We need to feel it ourselves. We need to live through the eyes of the three principles, so much so that other people can feel it from us. Because we don't want to try to talk about anything that we don't have a direct experience of ourselves. So that's the first thing. We go in armed with our own well-being and know where it came from. And know that the only way that we can lose sight of it is if we inadvertently think ourselves away from it. You know, use the power, the creative power of thought against ourselves. So we know all this when we go into a community, or when we do coaching, or when we work with businesses. This is what we know. We bring that into the community. Second thing is very logical. People come in with a lot of ideas in their mind about what their life means to them, what they are in life, what the best thing would be to have brought into the community. And people have all these ideas. Our job becomes how to loosen the grip of those ideas on people's heads. So we do whatever we can do to get their minds to calm down and relax. So Roger Mills would have fun with people. When we are having fun with people, people's minds tend to relax. So he would, you know, take them on outings. They would have community dinners. A lot of people respond to food. They would, you know, people have different needs. So they did these surveys, little makeshift surveys to find out what people really needed. They said they were having trouble with their kids. And so out of that came a parenting class. But it wasn't an official parenting class. It was an informal parenting class where people would just sit around and bring up the parenting issues that they were experiencing and have them be looked through the eyes of the three principles when they were talking about it. Same thing with they were really frustrated about the schools in their relationship with the schools. It was the same thing. So it became a parent-teacher organization. And so it was looking for opportunities where you could get people's needs met, have fun with them, get their minds to calm down. And that's really what any of us do in coaching anyway. We hope to get people's minds to calm down in order for them to be able to hear new. Because if you bring in your old stuff, whatever you hear is just going to bounce off of it. So those are the first two, I hate to call them steps because they're not necessarily in order, but they're components or something. And then there's deep listening. And deep listening is, I don't want to say too much about it now, but deep listening is listening with nothing at all on our minds, being a total blank, just taking people in and hoping that we hear deeply enough so that we can actually hear the wisdom of universal mind energy speaking to us. That's where all the answers are. We have to listen for those answers. But the only way we can listen for those answers is to be so incredibly quiet in our minds that we can hear them. And then the fourth component, so to speak, is through our listening, once we hear what people need to hear, we can then convey what this three principles understanding is all about, not by talking about it in terms of here are the three principles, but in terms of what people are open to hearing in that moment that they're hearing it. And so we meet, as Diane was saying, we meet people where they are at, and we help them see new. We hope to help them see new. The only way that people ever can see new is if they have an insight that helps them see new. But hopefully we can be pointing in the inside out direction of the way human beings really work, how our experience of life really gets created, moment to moment. So from all that, those four components, we are hoping that people will have these insights that will put them on a different trajectory of their lives. Now, we know that we cannot make insights happen in anybody. We can't even make insights happen in ourselves. So it's a mysterious thing. You know, 100 people can hear the same thing and one person might have an insight from it. It's always an inside job. And so we're just attempting to point in directions. Through our listening, we know what to say to people and when, and we hope that something takes hold. And then the more people that catch on to this, the more people that do have insights, they tend to gravitate together because they're sharing their new way of seeing the world. And it's working for them because suddenly they're living in a better feeling. And they come together themselves to make the changes that they need to make in the community. So that's starting from the inside and going out to affect the whole community. When I said last time that this was written up in the back of Hope for All, I said afterwards, I said, "Uh-oh, I better look at what's in the back of Hope for All because I haven't seen it since since right before COVID, and that's like so it's been 5 years. So I just read most of it over the last couple of days, and I think, wow, there's some really good stuff in there. And so I was actually surprised. But that, in a sense, is the framework, is the system for doing inside out work. And the whole purpose of the retreat is to take each one of those components and give people a personal experience with it, which is the only thing that really makes a difference. So I don't know if I've answered your question on that, Sheila, everybody's questions on it, but and I feel like I've talked too long. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
That was perfect, Jack. Perfect. If anybody has any questions, they want to ask anything, feel free to put your digital hand up. You'll find that in the reactions button. You can wave at me. I have another question that came up after the last webinar. So I remember asking, who is this training for? Who is the retreat for? I think your first answer was anyone, and then you qualified that somewhat. But in conversation with somebody, it wasn't clear if somebody's already working in community, if they're already in community, what would this training do for them? If they're already in there doing some work, what would this training give them?
Help enhance what they're already doing and make it even more powerful. That's what we hope. So make the changes that we're hoping will happen in their own lives and in the community. It's almost like, you know how a crystal enhances energy. What's the word? Isn't enhances? I forget what the word is.
Energizes.
Energizes. Thank you. It makes it more powerful. That's what we're hoping will happen. Now, when I said it's for anybody, I still mean that, because any of us who are involved with the three principles, if we go through something like this, it will help us with whatever we're doing with the three principles, and it will take us deeper. So it is for anybody, but if anybody's working with an organization, working with a school system, working with parents, those are all communities in a way. So however people define community for themselves, this would be helpful for them. And Diane.
Well, it just reminds me of a story that maybe will be really helpful to people. One of my students was already working as a social worker we had large institutional settings that was called like social and rehabilitation services was the name of this, with the 8-story building and all the floors are like little cubicles, like a rat maze. I don't know if you know those kind of settings that people work in, but she already had that job working as a social worker. They worked with children and youth division. And she started taking this class. And so she already was, social work has a strengths oriented approach towards social work, which is a little less diagnostic and what's wrong with you and giving you a category and developing a treatment plan to fix you, more seeing strengths. And we always said, if you're a strengths oriented social worker and then you get 3 principles, it's strengths on steroids because it just makes you so much more grounded. But taking this understanding that she was getting in this class and really getting it, and she really did. She had deep insight. She probably leapfrogged past me pretty quickly in terms of how well she saw things and could convey them. But she turned she ended up being the supervisor of a little unit of 6 or 7 social workers. Somebody left and she became interim. But she turned that little corner of this maze of cubicles of this gigantic building they were in into a yellow zone. Like they literally went with the idea of thinking like the golden light that everybody has inside of us, or let's reach for that. And I mean, they had like a yellow life preserver, one of those little things that you buy at the dollar store, and they had garlands and they had flowers. And the corner of this gray and awful building that everybody worked in became this very light spot. And one of the students' moms had gone for an interview and came back and told another person in this class about, I just went to the craziest section of this building where it was like they were having fun. Like there was yellow garlands and there were flowers stuck in the corner, and then people were laughing and they were talking, and it was so helpful. I got more, and I mean, that is just an exact thing of what happened with somebody already working in a social services environment that was probably doing a good job because they're a decent person, but then took this understanding into a corner and just it just exploded with life, and people noticed it, even folks that were just in there like not in a good mood because they have to apply for some sort of resource. So I think our communities are the places that we touch, and if we touch them with this understanding, they take off on their own. They really do. When people see it.
The other thing that occurs to me, and we talked about this last time, is that if you look around, even in this particular setting with all of you folks here, there isn't a whole lot of diversity. And there used to be a tremendous amount of diversity in the 3 principles world because of working in communities. And when we work in communities, people who catch on tend to, when they really catch on, they tend to become teachers themselves. And so there were a lot of people of color teaching this stuff back in those days. And that is one of the unfortunate things that has diminished somewhat over the years. And it's a particular interest to me to help that come back. Janet, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I was gonna add to that, and I always appreciate you, Jack, when we have our conversations. I've known Jack since I suppose I first came into the principals community since 2010. So we've always been able to have very open and frank conversations. And as you were saying about diversity within the principals community, like the whole range, whether it's gender, sexual orientation, disability, all of the different areas, or working in probation, say the protected characteristics, we really don't see it reflected within the principals community. However, the work is there. There are people still there. The whole range of diverse peoples are still doing the work. Unfortunately, as I've said earlier, it's where the spotlight is, and it's not always highlighted. And so I suppose in the background, myself, Danielle, who was here last week, and a few others, Amy Chen Mills and Jennifer, we have created a platform called Listening to Unheard Voices, because we wanted to create a platform so that people could see a reflection of themselves, wherever that was, still principles based, but so that they didn't have to wade through or feel that it wasn't for them because they couldn't see a reflection of themselves. And as Jack has said, it's not so much that we want to see more of this work being done. It's about highlighting and providing a platform so that it can be seen, because the work is still being done. It's just that it's not being seen as much. And like you said, even on the 3PGC site, and I know they have a communities section there. Again, yes, it's different languages, but you're not seeing the full range of that diversity. And so it is to shine a spotlight on all the work that's being done everywhere, you know, whether you're a mediator, whether you're a social worker, whether you are a parent. There are so many different ways in which the principles are being shared, and it's just not being seen. And so to highlight that, to spotlight that, just to share the different ways in which it is being shared in different communities, that's why I'm valuing this training, so that it's not just, okay, I say not just, because I do work with organizations, I do work with companies, and yet I also have, you know, creating a platform so other voices can be heard, and working with children and working with parents as well. And that may not come up in my profile as much, but that work is still being done. And I think it is about having more events like this so we can talk about the work we want to do, which may not sound popular or look popular, but we're all doing that work quietly in the background.
Yeah.
Thanks, Janet. Love you. Still open for questions from the audience, and if not, I have one more. Jan, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I can't find the put up my hand button. I haven't done this for a little while. I'm sorry I wasn't able to come last week because I was away on holiday, but I'm happy to join this part too. And it's not really a question. I suppose it's just I wanted to feed in a little bit. I have worked with women in criminal justice, and I came into the three principles because I was working with women who'd been in prison in the community, and Jacqueline Hollows wanted to meet some women with experience of prison, having done a lot of work with men in men's prisons. And she was linked up with me, and we did a little bit of work together, and that's how I came into the principles. And I guess I can see what you're saying about, you know, that quite a lot of events are around coaching. And yet, in my experience, I mean, I've just been to the Three Principles conference in London, and I felt that there was quite a lot about community there. And I know Jacqueline is somebody who's moved on, but and I think there can be issues in getting funding for work that's in community. And so it's maybe less high profile. I should say at this point, I work in a university setting as a mental health mentor to students. And that feels, it's all one-to-one work rather than community. Jan, I'm not sure about you or others who are working not in a coaching, in a kind of independent capacity. I'm grateful that it's a salaried position where, you know, I know I'm being paid, and yet I can behind my closed door, I have the freedom to do all sorts of stuff that isn't part of my job description, but it's decidedly 3 principles. And I like this idea of kind of collating a lot of the work that's going on, and it being, there being an event that I really like talking to other people who are working in what we might call a community-oriented way. So, but I do have a sense that it's happening.
Yeah, it's
but maybe
happening.
it's not getting called out.
Mm.
Go on.
It's not coordinated. It's not getting called out, and a lot more can be happening. Thank you.
Well, that's
Claire.
interesting. Sorry, did you finish, Jack?
Well, I was just going to call on Claire because she had her hand up.
Oh, go, Claire. Sorry, I didn't see Claire.
Hi. So obviously Jan's touched on the elephant in the room a little bit, and that's money. Because, we all have to earn a crust, don't we, in this world that we live in. And, I was on networking event the other day, just a ladies networking event, nothing to do with principles, and the lady was talking about how she created a CIC, and I just wonder whether there's more like scope for that practical side of, I love what Jack's saying about the process, the journey and everything. But I think maybe there's something, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, there's loads of, I'm an ex-teacher. So if I could take this into schools, most schools at the moment, I know people who have trained in iHeart and things like that, and they can't get in because there's no money. So there's kind of, in that sense, and if you get the children, that's going to make such a difference, isn't it? So I wonder if there's the scope for conversations around the practical side of this in terms of raising funding, getting help with that kind of thing. So practical as always.
Great point, and we need to build that into the to the retreat.
Yeah.
Well, that was my question, actually. You just stolen it from me, Claire, but I'm very glad that you asked that, because it was something that I've been asked along the way. Yeah, how can we close the gap was how do we people, because last webinar was very much focused on low income communities, and then somebody approached me and said, well, that's all very well, and I'd love to do that work, but how do I get paid for it? Because I need to make money, like you said. We all need to earn a crust, very English saying. But yeah, I think it would be a great addition to the training that we have the practicals. And yeah, so we've got people raising their hands all over the place now. We've got
Gil was the first, I believe.
Go, Gil.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Jack. If you remember, we met in Denver back in the before day, before the pandemic in 2019. I shared with you then that I worked in a program in the South Bronx with guys getting out of Rikers Island. And I wish I knew more about your work at that time, but this was in 1969. So I think that was before things got going. But my question is along the same lines. You kind of had a step-by-step procedure that you all went through in working in Modello. Was Roger, did he have you said he was kind of flying by the seat of his pants, but he must have been able to present some kind of process or step-by-step kind of program for him to be able to get funded at that time. Is that still doable now? Is that still
He knew how to play the game in order to get money. He knew, he had been in the field for a long enough time so that he knew what people who had money wanted to hear so that he could get money. But as far as his knowing what to do on the ground, he really didn't. He was so confident within himself that he knew how much this worked for people. He had seen it around Salt Spring Island. people's lives changing. He just knew that if he went in there, kept staying in his health, kept giving people, I mean, he was working with the system, but he didn't know that it was the system. That whole system I laid out, he was doing that naturally. That's what happened. But he wouldn't have been able, well, I don't know if he would have been able to or not. But that's not what he would have articulated in the grant process.
But he had the, so that's what we, like you said, the first step for us is to, you know, within ourselves to have the conviction and the belief and the I guess maybe.
Yeah, whatever we see ourselves, deep within ourselves, and have that kind of confidence in it. If it's changed us in any way, then we just put ourselves in a position to be that for other people and in a community. So I noticed Janet's hand is up, and she probably has something to answer for that too.
I'm part listening to that and part listening to the question that Claire asked as well about funding, and that's why part of that for me, when I'm talking about, it doesn't have to be an either or, it's an and. It's about how creative can you be in moving monies around as well. So if you have private clients, you can have private clients or a contract or something like that and say part of your payment will subsidize this group work that's going to be going on here. Or, for example, here in the UK, you've got the Police and Crime Commission. If your work is going to reduce reoffending in some way or work with female, the victims of crime or the partners of offenders, then in applying to these different, and again, for small, I say small pots of money, 5K, 10K, but then you can start to do some work as well. So it's about being creative with how you then have the funds and how you use the funds. So sorry if I didn't follow on from yours, Jack, but that was going on in my head, Claire, and I just thought, oh, these are some of the things that I've utilized in the past to be able to do this, you know, reach the people I really, really, really want to reach. However, how can I get paid and keep the lights on at the same time?
Officially, we have 3 more minutes and we have 2 questions, so I'm willing to stay a little bit over. Sarah, were you next?
I'm happy to go next. Thank you, Jack. Really good to be here. So I just wanted to offer a little bit of hope and optimism, particularly speaking to Jan and Claire, and Janet's just chipped in on this as well. So I run a transformational change program focused in education. We have managed to get funding. We've focused in the UK on what's called a multi-academy trust. This is a larger organisation that's a group of schools that work together. So we've got some really good relationships with some chief execs that have been touched by the principals, profound shifts themselves. So they're in a very senior leadership position and they're committed to cascading through their schools. And we are in a position now with 2 pioneer head teachers that want to take it into the community as well. And every time I speak to them, I get the book out and I tell them the story. So it can happen. Maybe the difference is working at that leadership level. So they have seen it themselves, and then being quite creative about the design of that program. And our design is very much a leadership development program that then can be cascaded into the schools in a more cost-effective way. So anyone that wants to chat, that is in education, that wants to chat about that in the UK in particular, really happy to share where we've got to. In about 3 years, we've been working on the program, but hugely inspired by your work. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I forgot to, you know, finding and building and nurturing leadership in these places is absolutely essential for it being successful. So that's part of what we will be dealing with.
Right. Because the leadership has pots of money that they, because was a scrounge for money in Kansas also. But if you're trying to do something with alcohol, then you look at drug prevention money. If it's juvenile delinquency, you get, I mean, like there's these little pots but it is a scrounge for money. There's no doubt about that. And then we have one more hand.
Is that me?
That's you.
Hello, Jack, Sheila, how are
David.
you? Jack, I don't know if you remember, but we actually had this conversation about diversity at a lake in Galway. I spent my life kind of doing diversity and police work. And it just occurred to me two things. One, it's really important how we define diversity. If people think it's an abstract concept, Janet said it lovely a while ago, if people put it down as protected grounds, then most people see nothing in it for them and they opt out. So it's really key that we get that it's about every one of us. And that's what the principles brought to me. Jack, I think you might remember that conversation. Second thing that really occurs to me is there's huge energy in this call. There's huge passion. There's huge knowledge. The European social funds, and I found this out because of my time in the police, the European social funds give huge funding for projects like this. And to have a kind of a group like you have here, if we're able to pull that together, if that makes sense, the knowledge, the experience, the PhDs certainly go a long way to help, the books, the authors and so on. But where you have people with ideas and knowledge who want to share it, particularly across Europe, there's a lot of funding there for that type of thing. And I don't know if that's come up for discussion before or not, but it sounds to me like this would be a great forum for getting that kind of conversation going.
We are hoping that this will lead in that direction.
Yeah. Sorry, Jack, one more thing. The other thing that occurred to me was, sorry for cutting across you. I've spent time in London, particularly during the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. I would have been heavily involved in, learning the lessons. One of the things that can be really important for groups like this is people who have trying to break into police organizations in particular sometimes can be really difficult unless you have an insider dealer. And I'm using that in the the best possible way that I can. So the more you can encourage insider dealers, and I'm certainly one in terms of the Irish police, but the more you can encourage people who can act as segues, bring ideas like the principles is really, really crucial as well. And I'm happy to do whatever I can on that score. But
You did.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thanks, David. That's excellent.
Cool. I definitely remember you, Dave, from Ireland. I remember some singing and something in a pub. Kind of.
Old dogs on water and wine, I think it was.
Yeah, great time had by all. This has been a wonderful gathering. I'm so grateful that we followed up with another webinar. I appreciate all your shares, all your questions. I have dropped the link in the chat for our upcoming retreat in Spain. We have an early bird that ends on the 25th of July. If anybody, there's a four-part payment plan as well that we've introduced. There's also the opportunity to speak to me if anybody is short on funds. We do not want money to be an issue. We don't want the money to stop people doing what they really want to do in community. So that's a conversation with me. And also I feel like there are so many people that could connect here that are on this call and have conversations. And just your last share, Dave, that was wonderful in terms of funding. I think we're onto something here in terms of finding pots of money and getting out there and doing the work that we want to do. So if there's anybody who wants to connect with anybody, you can email me. I'll be sending the recording out tomorrow, and I can, because I'll have everybody's email address, so I can connect you if you would like to do that. If you've seen somebody or heard something on this call and you'd like to connect with somebody, feel free to ask me and I will connect you.
Yeah.
So is there anything, any final words, Jack, Diane, Janet, before we close?
want to hug everybody. I feel so excited about this. I just appreciate all of you so much.
I have a quick question. Can I
Yeah,
ask a quick question?
Patricia?
I go to church very close to Modello, or where Modello used to be, because I live in Homestead. It's in Homestead. Anyway, did Roger Mills, but I mean, I have my own definition of God, whatever. I don't tell them. Shh, I don't tell them that I'm a 3P mole. But anyway, did he use God, the God word there? Because my communities I would work in would be down south by Modello, where Modello was, here in Miami. I'm just curious, did God come into play?
I will say this. If wisdom speaks about whether people are ready to hear God, then
Okay.
you can talk God, but if he doesn't, then it would be unwise.
Okay, cool. All right, cool. No. I'm saying I'm saying would they accept it without talking about God? I don't want to talk about God.
Most of it is not talking about God.
Excellent.
Most
That's
of
what I
it-
want to know. Okay, cool. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you everybody for being here. We look forward to seeing some of you in Spain in October. And yeah, as I said, feel free to reach out and we'll connect. All right, everybody.
Great seeing all of you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye,
See you in
everybody.
Spain.
Thank you, Sheila.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.